It's an honor to introduce Rachel Starr Withers, an entertainer, speaker, and video producer. Rachel bravely shares her journey living with schizophrenia. From appearing on TV shows like MTV's Ridiculousness to hosting the Inside Schizophrenia podcast, she's a beacon of hope for those navigating mental health challenges. Through her videos and advocacy, Rachel reminds us that we're not alone and that a fulfilling life is possible even with schizophrenia. Welcome back to another episode of The Mindful Space. Today we have with us Rachel Starr. How are you?
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
I know, I'm excited too. I'm excited to hear all about your story. So just, for the people who don't know who you are, we are going to be discussing schizophrenia, right, which is the diagnosis that you have. Do you mind telling us a little bit of your diagnosis, just your journey with schizophrenia in general as an intro?
So I actually grew up hallucinating like faces in trees and monsters, and I thought that was like totally normal as a kid because you hear monsters in your closet, monsters under your bed. So I thought everybody did that. And it wasn't until I was in high school where I made a comment to my friends about it, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" And that's when I learned very quickly to not talk about it. And that I was super alone.
Okay.
And a few years, things progressed, and I was eventually diagnosed with, at the time, paranoid schizophrenia with dysthymia, which doesn't exist anymore. Now we have the schizophrenia spectrum. They've gotten rid of the specific diagnoses as far as paranoid, disorganized, and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But originally, that was my diagnosis, was paranoid schizophrenic.
You mentioned seeing monsters and hallucinating when you were young. You're talking as young as you can remember?
As far back as I can remember, I always just saw creatures and faces, and I heard noises and scratching in the walls and people talking. With mine, it's a common hallucination I have. It's like there's a radio been left on in another room in the house. So I hear voices having a conversation, but I can't quite make out what they're talking about. I can catch a word or two, but it's more it's just something's been left on. Somebody in a few rooms over is watching TV, but it's just a constant talking and kind of a gibberish going on.
Was it scary at all in the beginning? Or at least when you realized that you were the only one experiencing this symptoms?
So it was super scary growing up because I come from a very religious area. The Bible Belt of the South and whatnot. So in church, you hear about demons and angels. 3 times a week, I just assumed everybody heard and saw the demons and angels. I really thought it was because why else are we talking about them nonstop? But I really thought growing up that that's what it was. They were demons and angels, and mostly demons.
You're like, oh, I can see them. What do you mean you can't see them?
Yeah, pretty much.
We talked about them. I see them. Makes sense. Now, can you walk us a little bit how it came to be a diagnosis? Was it at what point it was too much, or maybe when you told your parents, or was it you yourself that seeked out for help?
It took me a long time to get a diagnosis. I originally kind of reached out for help in little bits, and I think most people are like me. You don't really understand how mental health works. And the majority of what we know comes from television, and you're kind of afraid to tell anyone because you're like, oh no, they're gonna lock me up. I'm gonna be put in a white room forever. They're never gonna let me out. So I was scared to even tell people how bad it was. So the first time in my late teens, I went to a psychiatrist and I told them, I was like, yeah, this is what's going on. But I told them the tip of the iceberg. And that guy was really weird, didn't like him. But he said, oh, I think you're borderline schizophrenic. I don't think that's a real thing. But anyway, that's what he had told me. I continue to get worse. The following year, I go to a different psychiatrist and I laid it all out. And that's when they're like, yeah, we need to do some testing. And I eventually got the diagnosis. And if you're out there and you're listening and you're worried about, you're afraid of getting help because you think, oh no, they're going to lock me up. That costs so much money. Mm-hmm. Shockingly, you won't get locked up unless you have money.
They don't want you in the system.
I can't stress that enough. Nobody wants to lock you up unless you're rich. And then it's like, Britney Spears, yes, come here. But unless you have money, they don't want to lock you up. So I always like to stress that because I just thought that's how it
That's so
worked. And no,
funny.
money is more important than sanity.
It's like you might get Baker acted if you're in
Yes.
harm to someone or yourself, but
Yeah.
that's about it. They'll
And in
release
that,
you.
and if you're like from poorer states like I am, you're going to jail. There is no mental hospital to put you in. You're going to jail. That's where you're going to wait out those 2 weeks.
Oh my God. That's hilarious. I
Dark
mean,
hilarious. Dark
now
humor.
you can
It's
laugh
fine.
about it, right? I'm sure at the time it was kind of scary. Dark humor. So at this point, how old were you?
21 was when I got like an official diagnosis.
I know you've come out on different interviews and you've talked about some of the treatments that you received prior to this diagnosis, a couple of them a little bit unconventional. You mentioned that you underwent ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy, during your junior year in college. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was after my diagnosis. And
Okay.
I started college taking the maximum number of credits, no problem. And around my junior year, I was taking the minimum. So just in 4 years, like my mental capacity went down so much and I could barely do the minimum. It was just very noticeable, my mental decline over those few years. And in that junior year, I was pretty much very desperate. I was incredibly suicidal. And they said, we'll give you 2 options, either electroconvulsive therapy or a vagal nerve stimulator, which at the time was where they would go in and they would like put a box inside of your neck. And my insurance said, no, we're not paying for the box. Have all the ECT you want. So they made the decision for me. It was very easy. And I had electroconvulsive therapy. I always stress this. It is a last resort treatment, and it's a last resort treatment for a reason. However, it saved me.
Mm-hmm.
Hands down, that's the only reason I'm here. It doesn't take away schizophrenia or anything like that, but it took away a lot of my deep suicidal impulses, which made my schizophrenia a whole lot easier to manage if I'm not constantly trying to kill myself.
No, yeah, that makes complete sense. And like, everybody's experience is different with different treatments, medicine. So I'm glad to hear that, like you said, it is a last resort. But for you at that point, I'm sure you were just desperate to try anything.
Yeah, and at that point, I'd been through, before they wouldn't let me have it, you had to go through pretty much all the antidepressants and all of the antipsychotics. So I'd been on tons and tons of medication, none of them working. So yeah, that was like the last ditch effort.
I wanted to touch up on that now that you mentioned the medication. And I feel like I ask every guest, are you pro, against? Obviously, you've taken them. But based on your experience, would you recommend medication? Is there a certain medication for schizophrenia that worked more for you than others?
I'm absolutely pro medication. I'm on the max dosage of 3 different antidepressants at the moment. And that's just what I have to have to function. And I've been on tons of different antipsychotics, and some have been good, some have been bad. I have tardive dyskinesia from being on such high dosage of antipsychotics. Luckily, I'm not like some people have. Tardive dyskinesia is muscle movements, tongue movements, kind of things that'll happen. I'll shake a lot sometimes. It's not ideal. I think you do what you need to do to keep going. And, TD, tardive, isn't that big a thing for me when it comes to being able to function and live life. So yeah, I'm definitely pro medication, anything that helps you get to the next day.
Was it a complicated, not procedure? I know in the beginning when you start taking medication, not all of them might work. Like I said, some of them work for some people. For others, it takes months for the effect, or it takes sometimes years to get that perfect combination. You say you're taking 3. Was it a easy process for you, stressful? What would you recommend for someone that might be thinking about starting medication for their mental health diagnosis?
It's like playing Russian roulette, especially if you have like schizophrenia, a very serious mental disorder. You very well will most likely have to go on multiple, then they'll tweak the dosage, and of course it takes months. The upside is that I could say is that you get used to it. I'm so good at medication now, like I know exactly what to expect because I'm like, okay, so in 3 months we'll see if I'm better. And you get really good at tracking it. So like it's annoying and sounds scary at first.
Okay.
Like, God, I don't want to go on what could end up being 25 different medications over the course of 5 years. But I'm like, yeah, let's add another. Let's see what happens. Biggest thing is like tracking them, seeing what works.
Add it to the cocktail. Yeah, you have to be very responsible, like you said, the tracking and, the dosages make a lot of difference as well. Correct?
Just it'll be shocking. So they'll take up like, we'll just add like a half a pill on this one, and then we're going to take this one down a half, and you're just like, okay. But if you don't track that, just like even listing each month, like, okay, and then being able to look back and be like, wow, I'll ask my mom. She's the one who notices a lot of differences with me. She's like, yeah, you seemed a lot happier last month. And being like, oh, okay, let me go look back through the journal, and this is what I was on. And
yeah, it's very important. So would you agree that medicine along talking therapy or psychotherapy or having a therapist was actually beneficial? Has that been your case?
Absolutely. Especially with schizophrenia, the whole talk side is usually pushed away. Like you just kind of think medications and hospitalization with schizophrenia, which is great for crises. But it's the everyday that so many people with schizophrenia need help with. And I have a counselor that I talk to once every 2 weeks, and she's amazing. And we don't talk about like really interesting things. Like you'd be like, oh man, schizophrenia, you're talking about hallucinations. No, we mainly talk about like the boring stuff. These are the struggles I'm having. Okay, well, it sounds like she's real big into journaling. It is what it is. She's like, you need to journal more. I'm like,
yeah.
Hate journaling. But it's that kind of stuff. She's like, the family dynamics and the counselors that I've had throughout my life, they're the ones who've really helped me on the managing the relationships around me, like with my family, with being able to work, even like friendships. And that's been like one of the biggest helps is having somebody to be like, okay, let me lay out what's happening because maybe I'm crazy. Because I know I have schizophrenia, but maybe I'm like crazy in interpreting what's going on. And it's really great to have like an outside person be like, okay, yeah, you might have been a little weird with this, but no, Rachel, they're taking advantage of you. That is not,
Okay. Like this has nothing to do with your schizophrenia.
Right, yeah.
This is life skills, and now we're going to talk about boundaries.
Because it's easy to just kind of say, well, I have schizophrenia,
I can
so
appreciate it.
I'm always at fault. It's really easy to just blame yourself for everything. So you just assume, well, I'm the messed up one, right? If this other person doesn't have schizophrenia, and I do, I can't trust myself.
And I feel like that goes with any mental health diagnosis as well. You can either use it as a clutch or an excuse, right? I don't like the word excuse, but as a limit, like it limits you, or you can just learn how to manage it and overcome it and just live with it. Seems like that's what you're doing.
Pretty much. It's not going anywhere, so.
Another interesting, yeah, exactly. Another interesting thing that I read was that besides the ECT, which is not like a common thing, and you mentioned religion was a big thing in your life. You mentioned something about an exorcism.
Yes.
Tell me, please.
Well, when I was 17, I actually went to it was like between high school and college kind of thing. So I'd already graduated high school, but it wasn't a college. But it was this one-year Christian school. And my schizophrenia was getting worse there, but we didn't know what it was at the time. So I was super responsible, and I went to like the counselor of the school, and he said, "You're demon possessed."
Your school counselor said that. I thought you were going to say like your pastor or something.
The counselor at the school, who was a licensed psychologist. Just so we're clear, he was a licensed psychologist. He also prescribed me medication. He said, "You are demon possessed." So they took me to do a 3-day exorcism. It was nothing like the movies. My head didn't spin. I spoke no Latin. Major letdown. You would think I'd at least get some language skills.
I was hoping for that.
None. They just didn't let me eat, or I could have water, but you couldn't eat or drink anything for 3 days, and a lot of praying and laying on hands. If you're like listening or watching, don't know what that is. It's like when people pray for you, but they touch you. Very touchy. Didn't like that. Don't like being touched. But anyway, that was that for 3 days. And after 3 days, they said, "You're healed." And, I was like, okay, cool. But the hallucinations like came back the next day, and so I went back and said, I don't think it worked. And they said, well, that's your choice. You let Satan back in. Because the only thing worse than having to go through an exorcism is going through an exorcism and it not working. You still got Satan in you.
Yeah, I mean
that means you're choosing this.
How did that make you feel at the moment?
Oh, that was horrible. That was. I mean, it was a whole Christian school, and then to be labeled as you really like Satan, like he's in Rachel. You got to stay away from her.
Not even the exorcism worked on you.
So no, they told the others stay away.
So how does that? Yeah, how does that transcribe to the present moment when it comes to religion? How does that affect your whole life?
Looking back, I didn't talk about it for years because I was so embarrassed. Like, who has an exorcism? Like, that's crazy. That's like movie stuff. Like, I didn't tell anybody. And I started working in entertainment, and I eventually started making these videos where I talked about my schizophrenia on YouTube. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do one about my exorcism. So I talk about it, and the craziest thing happened because all of these people start messaging me that have mental disorders, and they're like, Rachel, I've been through the exact same thing. And I was shocked how many other people reached out to me with stories almost exactly like mine. People with bipolar, with schizophrenia, with all sorts, with autism, with Down syndrome, telling me how they'd been through exorcisms, very similar to mine, some of them much worse. And it just blew me away. I was like, I didn't realize how common of a thing this was. Here I'm feeling like a freak, like this is so weird, no one's been through this. And all of these people just start reaching out like, wow, we've all been through the exact same thing in different religions. I don't want to say it's just Christianity, different religions too.
When I learned about that, it was caught by surprise because you always see it in the movies, right? And you think, oh, it's a movie thing, like, oh, back in the 1800s or whatever, when they would burn witches, no, it's still happening.
They would probably still be burning, but they were like, I might get in more trouble for that one.
It didn't become very socially acceptable, so they banned it. Now, you mentioned, well, that's another thing I wanted to talk about, your social media presence. You started making these YouTube videos, really putting yourself out there. Looking back on that moment, what are your thoughts like now when you see yourself where you are today?
Oh, incredibly cringy. Because like, when you're going through something, you're like, oh, I'm like 21 years old or whatever. And I'm like talking like this is the end of the world. And I'm like watching it now like, oh my God, shut up. Like things are going to get so much worse. Like that was nothing. What are you whining about? Because you're just like, oh, like at the time it was a big deal. Oh my God, I'm hallucinating. Like, okay, whatever. But yeah, that is part of the journey because now I talk about schizophrenia like it's nothing. Whereas in the beginning, it was a big deal to try and like come out and say, yes, I have schizophrenia. And my parents were terrified because this was before the internet. I'm older. This is when the internet was like, baby as far as videos. YouTube had just been made. And they're thinking, no, this is going to get out. You'll never get a job. Spoiler alert, schizophrenia. I've never had a real job anyway. But yeah, they were like thinking this is going to ruin her life once this gets out. And if anything, it's been one of the most freeing things because when I first got schizophrenia, only thing you could find were like cold medical documents or like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like that's it. And I was like, you know what? Even if I appear on like the 1,000th page of Google, if somebody else has schizophrenia and they're looking for a normal-ish person, I'll come up. That's at least my goal. And it's incredible to look back now because they're amazing. Like you go on TikTok and you can find people with schizophrenia, making hilarious videos, just everyday people. And I don't want to say it's accepted because it still isn't accepted, but you can find people like you so easily nowadays. And that's just incredible how easy it is to realize you're not alone.
I love that about technologies nowadays. I mean, it has its pros and cons, but one of them would be this, being able to talk about things that nobody talked about before and being able to spread awareness throughout, like internationally, And I mean, you've had some pretty cool jobs.
Yes.
So you can't talk about having jobs. Tell us a little bit more what you do. For those who do not know you, I do know. They're pretty cool jobs.
I work in entertainment. The coolest part of what I do is I now and then I get to do stunt work. So Ridiculousness on MTV. I've got to work for different movies, Black Panther. And I get to get blown up. I specialize in fire and fighting, and I love whenever I can get those jobs. They're hard to come
That's
by,
so
but I
cool.
love doing them. But yeah, I get to work in entertainment, both behind and in front of the camera. I also host a podcast similar to this called Inside Schizophrenia with Healthline, and it's just I get to. If it's fun, I'm gonna search it out and do it. And luckily, having a job in
No, I love
entertainment
it.
is an excuse to do dumb things. And we did a horror action movie about a few years ago. It's on Tubi called Shock Fight, and I actually get to play a character named Schizo. And it's great to have a mental health
Interesting.
character here in a horror movie.
Like, I can do that role.
And she's not the villain. In fact, she's not good or bad. I would say, because that's how people see schizophrenia as like, oh, you're either like, maybe you're some kind of like creative genius, artist person, or you're like the serial killer. And then you just have like a normal, no, they're not really anything. They're just another of the characters.
There's no gray area.
They're just, she has schizophrenia. Yeah. It really doesn't play that much into the storyline because she's not the killer. I'm not ruining the movie. That wasn't the twist. Don't worry.
I love it. I mean, I'm sure these jobs also gave you an opportunity to, and the podcast and the videos that you did on YouTube, to create like a supportive community, correct? How important do you think, or has it been for you to get that support from people?
It's always just amazing to me. People who reach out to me. I got to do just a family trip. We went to Morocco a couple months ago, and I get back and I happen to have a message from someone in Morocco, and I'm thinking it was from the trip, like maybe somebody I met, and no, it was a completely separate thing. This person in Morocco had found my videos, and they were just messaging me about schizophrenia, and I'm like, that's so crazy. I was just there. And they were like, what? And I'm like, I know, right? And I like showed them the pictures, and they're like, that is so wild that you were just insane. Here in this random country that I had had no experience with except for a few months. And I was able to say, yeah, I really enjoyed that. And we're like talking about Morocco and this person, because they lived there their whole lives. And we're like, I'm saying, yeah, I really enjoyed this and that. And then we start talking about the mental health care there. Because I was like, that was something interesting, because whenever I travel, I'm always kind of wondering what's different. How, are things, and I really didn't get a good feel when I was there. So it was great, because here now I finally get to talk to someone who's in the system there and be like, okay, so tell me about this. And I have met so many people across the world, and while their lives will be very different than mine, we still share so many things that are alike. And we're able to connect right away because of schizophrenia. And that's pretty cool.
If you would have told this to yourself 10, 15 years ago, you probably would have been like, no way. Or when you started your YouTube videos.
Oh, I had no idea when I started the YouTube video that the schizophrenia would even matter. I just did it because I was like, you know what?
It was just a thing. I was just trying to let it out.
Yeah, I was just, like, let me talk. I haven't talked about this, and I feel so alone. So let me make a video if there's somebody else who feels that way, that they're not.
I mean, your outreach goes as far as you have like a coloring book for kids with schizophrenia.
A comic book, yes.
Oh, a comic book. I love that. How did you come about that idea, and how do you feel that it's helping the kids?
I love it. It's 3 issues, and what happens is I'm going back in the very first issue, and I talk to my younger self, because she's having hallucinations. She's seeing these monsters and doesn't understand what's happening. And so I help her understand what's going on. And so as the different little kids, we go and talk to different little kids who are having, one has depression, one has ADHD. And as they learn to manage their disorder, they're then able to recognize it in other people. And they go and help other kids. And when that happens, they become a superhero. And so each one is that kid's journey becoming a superhero, learning to deal with these mental disorders.
It really is that easy, but it's not.
Right.
It's weird.
And that's my thing, is that I grew up with this as a kid, so I know there are other kids like that. I know there's other kids out there who are seeing these things and they're scared to tell anybody. And I hope that they'll be able to get, to see the comic book, and it'll help some kids.
No, I love all of your outreaches, and, I know you're always out there trying to spread the word and trying to make schizophrenia something normal, or get it normalized, at least so people can talk about it. And I love and appreciate the dark humor. Have you ever encountered, though, any setbacks or challenges when it comes to this, for you to bring your story out? Because I know there's always a positive and a negative, but what are some of the challenges that you might have faced?
It's funny because people are going to react to you the way you present the information. I'm very kind of like laid back and joking, and I think it disarms people immediately. It's kind of like I'm acting like it's no big deal, so they act like it's no big deal when they find out about my schizophrenia. Especially like when I'm at the gym or in my boxing class and there's somebody new, I'll usually say it like, because I do want people to know around me, because I can tend to act odd or do odd things. For one, the TD makes my tongue hang out of my mouth when I'm boxing, and I don't want people to be like, is she doing a very bad like flirting with me? What's happening here? Like, what? So sometimes I'll say it like, oh, by the way, I have schizophrenia, so if I do something weird, that's why. And they'll just be like, oh, okay. And then like maybe they'll ask me like a few days later, like, so that what you said, you really have it? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, I've just never met anyone. I'm like, no, you probably have. 1 in 100 have it. You just didn't know. And that's usually kind of how I like broach the subject.
Because people don't talk about it.
And people be like, oh, I didn't, no idea. And that's usually the interactions I have. Now, the exception would be the internet, because the internet is full of horrible people also. Those same people can...
And people that will say anything on social media, but not to your face.
Yes, so I have gotten many very bad comments and just flat out even just emails, harassing, and I'm a woman, so they usually tend to be very rapey, things like that. So there have been some very bad things. I always say, like, don't read the comments when it comes to videos, because people can be very stuff they would never have the guts to say in real life to you. They just let it flow, and there are some very worrisome people that have contacted me before due to all of this. So I know that if we met in real life, it would be completely different, right? And all I can say is that I'm glad they saw the video.
How do you envision yourself in the future when it comes to mental health and spreading awareness?
Oh, I have no idea, because I couldn't have envisioned where I am now. So who knows? I don't even like to envision like a few months ahead, because I'm like, I don't know. Things happen so quickly. I have no idea. A few years ago, this has nothing to do with schizophrenia. Well, it kind of does. I was doing an international speaking tour about schizophrenia. While on this tour, I picked up a rare flesh-eating bacteria in my face. So I end up in isolation in the hospital. It's this whole like weird side journey of my life. Oh my God. And I end up causing like a national health scare in Australia, which I've never been to, because like the pictures of my face, because I looked so gnarly. I mean, I looked like I was in a zombie movie. Like, so many of my friends thought I was kidding when I posted the photos. It was fake. But it ends up leading to all these really weird, it went viral. Daily Mail picks it up. And then I'm suddenly having like the Hong Kong health department is trying to message me like, oh my God, did you get this from here? And I'm like, no, don't worry, I didn't. But now I'm getting to talk to them about schizophrenia stuff, because they were like, well, why were you here? And I'm like, well, this why. And it's just weird, the things that'll just kind of happen in life. Getting a flesh-eating bacteria was not on my checklist, but it just sort of happened. I survived, don't worry.
Definitely.
Yeah, but it was just crazy because it led to so many other things. And how many people do you know that, like, when the zombie apocalypse happens, you guys, I'm ready. Like, I am ready, because I'm already, like, my face was, like, half dead. I feel like I can be the go-between.
That's insane.
I know.
That's scary, though.
It's amazing. But
you're like, yeah, I know.
But I know. I'm like, I know. But like,
there.
Is that not the most like weirdest like supervillain? You have a schizophrenic with a flesh-eating bacteria. I mean, what's going on here? That's an amazing comic book waiting to happen.
Probably 1 in a million. Yeah, definitely put it on the resume.
I try. It really doesn't get me the jobs you think it would.
It's a 50-50. People would really be interested or be like,
pretty much. Yeah, they usually go for the next. They're like, I don't know what's happening, and this is too much.
Yeah, but I kind of want to find out more. Let me do the first interview. I want to know more about this. Oh my God, it's hilarious. Well, I've loved this conversation. I know people want to get to know you more. You're all over the internet. You guys can Google research. I love the dark humor you put into the schizophrenia.
Spell my name correctly. It's Rachel Starr with 1 R, because I have the same name as a porn star. So I just don't want you're going to be pulling up Rachel Starr and they're like, wow, that's who she was interviewing? She does have an extensive body of work.
That's hilarious.
She makes a lot more money than
double
me,
check, triple check. that I do it right. I feel like I do have it right now. You're making me doubt myself. So I'm gonna
see.
go
Yeah,
back
you
and
better
double
check those videos you were watching. No, you're gonna notice her. She puts in the work. She is very impressive. She does stunts of her own. Not the type I do.
Got it. Rated R is kind of.
Oh, X.
Well, for anyone that, okay, for anyone that has schizophrenia, might be struggling with it or considering, reaching out for help, what would be your advice? Your last words.
NAMI.org, NAMI, NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. They are amazing. They have so many programs, support groups. They're one of the best ones to find for your area. And if you're a caregiver and you're listening, having schizophrenia is difficult because one of our main symptoms is disorganized thinking. And it is so hard because it's like you have this major illness, and at the same time, you're expected to do all this research and be on top of knowing what all the meds are, finding doctors who will even treat schizophrenia. And it's a lot. So if you're a caregiver, any help when it comes to that area is amazing, and just learning and becoming knowledgeable. And that's one of the places that NAMI is incredible. It's a great resource for knowledge, support groups, and just figuring out hey, this is what schizophrenia is. And here's some possible next steps for you to take.
I love it. Yeah, well, we're going to list some additional resources when we post the videos, at least on our YouTube channel, so you can look for that. But thank you again. Thank you for bringing awareness. And this diagnosis that unfortunately is stigmatized a lot, and people get scared to talk about it, scared of people with that diagnosis. And it's not all bad, folks. They're just normal people trying to take their medications and go about their days. I love it. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Let us know your thoughts. Please leave us a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with mental health content. I'll see you guys next week. Yay.